How's it going? Woo! Cool, finally up here, wow. I've been hiding out in my room trying to finish this talk on MicroConf. Just recently finished it, we'll see how this goes. So I am Cortland Allen, I created indiehackers.com, and I work at Stripe. I actually bought Indie Hackers. It's been a year now since we announced the acquisition at last MicroConf. It's been great, highly recommend Stripe. So what is Indie Hackers, for those of you who don't know? Indie Hackers is a community of software engineers and founders and entrepreneurs and MicroConf attendees, apparently, who are all helping each other build their businesses. So we've got a community forum where people will describe their specific challenges, give each other feedback on their landing pages, and just in general help each other build their businesses. I've done 50 podcast interviews with founders, and I've asked how they got to where they are today and what kinds of things make their businesses tick. And I've also done about 300 interviews with founders just like you, every one of whom has shared their revenue numbers, their growth strategies, their marketing strategies, their business model, their goals, etc., so that you guys can go read and learn from what they did. Now, one of the things that I've recognized with these founders is that most of these are success stories. Most of these founders are making hundreds of dollars a month or thousands or even millions of dollars a month, but every one of these founders failed. And they failed and they failed and they failed again before they finally got to the point where they succeeded. And as they failed, they learned things. Like the way that they viewed the startup landscape, the way that they viewed the challenge of starting a business ended up different after each one of their failures and experiences than it was before. So what I'm gonna try to attempt to do today is help you guys skip a few steps, hopefully skip a few of these failures by imparting a few experienced founder mental models onto you. So you can sort of see the way and see the world the way that some of these experienced founders do rather than having to repeat their mistakes. We'll see how this goes. My approach is gonna be to talk about four different landscapes, four different startup landscapes, each of which is a metaphor for a challenge that you will face as a founder growing your business. And it doesn't really matter what your goals are. It doesn't matter if your goal is financial independence, if you want creative freedom, if you want the time to work whenever you want, if you want to be able to work from whatever location you want. No matter what it is, you're more likely to get to your goal if you have the right mental models for visualizing the challenges in front of you. So without further ado, let's get into it. First one we're gonna talk about is the startup runway. It's the most basic of startup landscapes, but I thought I'd spruce it up a little bit because this doesn't really quite get across how dire and important this landscape is. So we'll call it the startup runway of almost certain death. You don't wanna go off this runway, right? Your runway is a representation of how much money you have left in the bank. It's a representation of how much time you have left until your business is dead. And ultimately, how do you navigate this landscape? How do you navigate a runway? Well, it's pretty simple, right? The goal is to reach profitability, to become cash flow positive at least, before your company runs out of money, right? You want to take the plane off before you get to the end of the runway. And you do that just the way that you think you would. So a pilot will always measure the distance between the front of his plane and the end of the runway. And he'll know the capabilities of his plane. He'll know how powerful the engines are, how long it takes to take off. The pilot will know exactly the capabilities of his plane and how long it takes to take off. And he'll add some buffer as well, right? Just in case he goes over. And the entire time the pilot's going down the runway, he'll have his eyes on the end of the runway to make sure that he can make adjustments to the controls and the speed so he can take off, right? This is what every pilot does, so they don't crash the plane on takeoff. And it's what every founder should do with their company as well. But that's not quite how it works out. So let's look at some examples of how not to do this. Exhibit number one, me in 2009. I just graduated college and I won $25K in a business plan competition, which was enough for me to last 1 year. So I got a 1-year lease on an apartment in Boston. I said, let's do this thing. And I spent the next year writing a lot of code. I built a product, I was refactoring it, I was coming up with great designs, I built a bunch of landing pages, I wrote unit tests, and I even found time to launch. About 11 months in, I launched my product. I did pretty much everything in my list except for charging money for a product to customers. And after the end of the year, my startup was dead. I ran out of money. How could this have happened, right? I had no idea this was coming. I was as shocked as anyone. Now you guys are at MicroConf, you guys understand. You should probably charge money for your product. You should probably know how much runway you have and adjust your plans to make sure that you get to your goal in time, right? But I think after this talk, go out in the hallway, talk to some other founders, ask them, when was the last time you calculated your runway? When was the last time you adjusted your plan based on how much money you have left in the bank? Do you have a graph showing your runway? And I think the answers might surprise you. So let's look at exhibit number 2. This is my buddy, Chris Chen. He has a company called Instapainting. We did Y Combinator together back in 2011. I think Chris got $120,000 as a solo founder, which he somehow made last for 3 years. So let's see what Chris has to say about how he navigated the startup runway of almost certain death. He said, I survived on my various ideas and pivots for about 3 years. I just spent an absurdly long amount of time pivoting. He had a social music startup, but didn't charge any money for it. Said, but as I ran lower and lower on cash, my ideas would start focusing less and less on building social music apps and more on how to generate revenue immediately. Right? So he's a pilot on the runway. He was like, oh shit, I should probably try to take off. And then I ran out of all my cash. I was $4,000 in debt, so I had to put up the website for my last idea to collect money. I created, tested, and launched it in just a couple of days. I put the page up on Reddit, and in 2 weeks, I made over $2,000 in sales. So it took him 2 days to launch a profitable product after spending 3 years pivoting, right? And this is why I call it the runway of almost certain death, because he actually went off the runway. He was in debt, and he somehow pulled up and survived. So it's not the best way to navigate this landscape, but it's certainly better than what I did. So let's look at a pro and see what a pro does. This is Max Litvin. He runs a company called Grammarly with his co-founder. I had the pleasure of having Max on my podcast, and I asked him, Max, you're an experienced founder. You've had an acquisition before. You built a successful company before with your co-founder. How long did it take you guys to reach profitability with Grammarly? And he said, less than 6 months. It was very quick. It was very quick because we had a really solid plan for how to get there. We didn't know who was going to buy our product, so we tried to sell to institutions, to organizations, to individuals at the same time to see what works better, and eventually they figured out who their target customer was. And by the time we finished building version 1, we had a pipeline of organizational buyers lined up. So I thought this was very impressive. I asked Max, how did you know that this is what you should do? Why did you do this? And he said, necessity. We realized that building this product would be really hard and really expensive. So by the time we were done with the MVP, we'd probably be out of money. Right? So this is a pilot on the runway who's measuring the distance between his plane and the end of the runway. He's realizing my plane's not going to make it. I need to change the scope of my product. I need to shrink it so it can actually fit within the allotted time. I need to change the order of operations and do sales and marketing before I continue building my product so I can reach the end of the runway. And he ended up taking off well before the end of the runway and navigated this landscape perfectly. So that's exactly what you want to do if you're on the startup runway of almost certain death. But I have a secret for you, which is that you don't have to navigate the runway of almost certain death. You can buy a helicopter. Right? You can just take off at your leisure whenever it's appropriate for you. And how do you do that, right? How do you get one of these helicopters? Well, the secret is to realize that the runway of almost certain death is really just a metaphor for burning through cash. And if you don't want to burn through your cash, don't quit your job. About 30% of the founders that I've talked to on Indie Hackers started their companies this way. They didn't quit their jobs. They built their business while they were working a full-time job, while they were working as a consultant, while they had a services business or worked as an agency, and they were fine. Right? And I can already see a lot of you looking at me like, Cortland, I don't have time to build a business on the side of my job. Right? I work 40 hours a week. I got a family, I got a wife, I got kids, I got hobbies, man. I have 5, maybe 10 hours max every week to work on my business. I can't get done what I need to get done in that amount of time. I need to be over there. I need to be on the runway of almost certain death if I want any chance of surviving. I don't think that's true. I don't think that's necessarily a good idea. I think you should instead take a page from Max Litvin's playbook, and instead what you should do is plan. Right? If you don't think that your helicopter is able to take off in 5 or 10 hours a week, then what you need to do is actually adjust your plan and your model to fit within the constraints that you have allotted. Right? You need to shrink the size of your helicopter, right? Change the scope and the ambition of your product, change your launch strategy, and actually adjust to the time that you have so that you can take off in those 5 or 10 hours a week. And interestingly, this is the exact same skill set that you need to navigate the runway of almost certain death. It's the same thing, right? Even if you're on the runway, you still have time constraints. You still have to change what you're working on. You still have to make sure that your strategy is actually going to work within the allotted time. And I think if you have a lot of trouble developing the skill set to do that on your helipad while you're at your company, it's probably not the best idea to quit your job and bet your life savings that you're suddenly going to develop the skill set while you're on the runway of almost certain death. So let's go to our next landscape. This landscape has to do with ideas. A couple weeks ago, a founder on the Indie Hackers forum made a post and he said, hey everybody, after a year of looking for an idea, I've achieved nothing. Ouch, that really sucks. A year is a very long time to spend looking for an idea and achieve nothing, and it wasn't for lack of trying. He had a beautiful Trello board set up. He had dozens of ideas in his Trello board, and he would put them in the first column and sort of shift them along from column to column as he tried to validate them, and some didn't make it. And some of these ideas were just bad, so they never made it to the end. And some of his ideas were really good ideas, and the only problem was that they were very obviously good ideas. By the time they got to the end of his Trello board, he realized that somebody else was already working on this idea. They already had a product built. They were targeting the same niche that he was targeting. They had a team. They were making tens of thousands of dollars a month in revenue, and he would get discouraged and toss the idea out. And I could really relate to what he was. I think people here in the audience can probably relate. It's hard to come up with a good idea, right? And a lot of the best ideas you come up with, someone else already stumbled upon it. And people will tell you, well, that's just normal, right? And too bad, because you can't brute force coming up with ideas. You have to sit around and wait for inspiration to strike you. You can't really force it. If you try to force it, you're going to come up with bad ideas. And I really don't like that advice. I don't think it's true. I don't think it's very inspirational. I think you need to learn to come up with ideas. I think part of running a business is constantly coming up with ideas. It's not just at the beginning. How do you build an audience? You need ideas for that. How do you decide what product you're going to work on? You need ideas for that. How do you know how to launch successfully? Well, that requires ideas. What happens when you exhaust your first marketing channel? You need ideas for new marketing channels. What happens when you've completely saturated your first target customer segment? You need to find a new target customer segment, and that requires ideas as well. You never stop coming up with new ideas throughout the lifetime of your company, and so it's important for you to actually develop a skill, right? You can't just sit around in the shower and hope for ideas to strike you. It's very passive. It's not very inspirational, and kind of boils your business down to luck, which I think all of you guys want more out of your business than that. What you need to do is actually figure out the right levers to press to increase the ability to come up with creative ideas that are actually going to work. And you need to have the right mental models in order to do that. And for that, I like to use the landscape that I call the El Dorado of ideas. So El Dorado is like this mythical Spanish kingdom full of gold. If you indulge me for a second, just imagine a landscape that's full of, this is some clip art I found and put together. Imagine a landscape that's just full of hills and rivers and valleys and trees, and there's just millions of golden nuggets underneath the landscape. And there's also thousands of people shuffling around with pickaxes and shovels and pans trying to find all this gold, right? Now, El Dorado represents the market, the gold represents good ideas, and the people with the pickaxes are all of you. They're all the founders in the world looking for good ideas to work on. And I think if you imagine coming up with ideas sort of in this framework, you come to a couple of insights. First of all, what does it mean to come up with ideas that are obvious, right? What does it mean when the ideas that you come up with are good, but everyone else has already discovered them? Well, in El Dorado, what that means is that essentially it's gold that everybody else has found, right? This is literally surface level gold, surface level ideas that's so obvious that anyone walking around is going to pick it up, right? And it's not a very good strategy for coming up with ideas, because ultimately, when you go into work every day, when you're going to the grocery store, when you're sitting in your house looking out the window, the chances that you're going to spot some gold that nobody else has picked up are tiny, right? It's almost impossible for that to happen, and it happens every now and then, right? You can go on Indie Hackers and read stories of people who come up with ideas that they just randomly discovered, but if you could see the denominator, if you could see the vast number of people who are going through life and never hit on any really good ideas, they never discover any gold that someone else hasn't already taken, you would see that the ratio is not very much in your favor. It's not a great strategy for finding ideas, and I think you should be more deliberate than that. Another strategy you'll see is what I call the shallow diggers. These are the people who actually take their shovels in El Dorado, and they dig a hole, and they take a few steps because there's no gold there, and dig another hole. And they just keep doing this all over El Dorado, hoping to strike some easy gold, right? There was someone on the Indie Hackers forum who came, and every single day, he was kind of a spammer. Every single day he would come and post like 2 landing pages, and he wouldn't say anything. Like, I made this landing page, check it out. And he eventually stopped coming because people complained, but his whole strategy was to dig these shallow holes. He would just find a new industry, make a landing page, cross his fingers, hope that something happened, and nothing ever happened, right? Maybe if I make 100 landing pages a year and don't really do any research or look into it, people will like my idea. It's not a great strategy for finding ideas, and it's not what I recommend. I think what you want to do, if you do this, you end up spending pretty much all of your time sort of traveling around El Dorado, sort of traveling around the market, and that breadth, really you should exchange for depth, right? Instead of searching far and wide, you should spend more of your time digging deeper. And so what does it mean to dig deep, right? What does this actually mean? Digging deeper basically means you're actually getting your hands dirty, right? You're digging deep into a part of the market, you're understanding those customers, you're trying to empathize with them and understanding what it's like to be them. It means asking questions like, who are these people, right? Where do they hang out? What do they like? What do they buy? What do they not like? What do they not buy? Where do they get their news? Where do they get their product recommendations? It means you're actually digging deep in a part of the market and getting to know these people. And the thing is, not very many people do this. Once you start digging deep, you start uncovering all sorts of gold that other people haven't found because it's not on the surface. And you'll come up with more creative ideas. And you'll build a better product as well. When I was working on Indie Hackers, I spent 3 straight days just reading Hacker News. And a lot of people here are on Hacker News. 3 days reading Hacker News is not a pleasant experience. But as a result, I learned a lot of things that people on Hacker News liked, right? I understood what kinds of things they wanted to see in interviews. I understood that I needed to include transparent revenue numbers, and that's something that nowadays seems obvious, but back then I had no idea. I was agonizing over it because people would say, no, I won't do an interview for your site because you forced me to share your revenue numbers. Then I would read Hacker News and people would hate on anyone who shared a story and didn't share revenue numbers, right? There's been a lot of interview sites before Indie Hackers that have done interview entrepreneurs, and many of them didn't dig deep enough, and they didn't know what people really liked and didn't know what people didn't like. And I think that's what you should do for your product as well. Dig deep and understand what your customers actually care about. You'll build a better product, and you'll figure out gaps in the market that aren't really serving what these people want or what these people need. What if I wanted to come up with a new idea? Right? Earlier on, I said you never have to stop coming up with new ideas for your company. It's not just the initial idea; it keeps going. Let's say I wanted to expand Indie Hackers to focus on indie game development, not just bootstrapping a startup. Like, what would I do? I would dig another hole, right? Go back into El Dorado. That's a different part of the market. That's a whole different idea, even though it's similar to the current Indie Hackers, but I would dig another hole. And another strategy you'll see in El Dorado that I don't think works very well is people who refuse to dig. They say, you know what, I've got a pretty good intuition for where the gold is. I know exactly where the gold is. I'm gonna build my house here because I know I'm sitting on a gold mine. And then it turns out that there's no gold there. They didn't do any digging. They didn't talk to their customers. They didn't figure out what people actually wanted. Right? Every single time you have a new idea, you need to dig. At Stripe's a company worth billions of dollars. You know what people at Stripe do? They come up with ideas and they talk to customers a lot when they're doing new things. They don't just use their intuition. If it's good enough for Stripe, it's good enough for all of you. So if I wanted to build a new segment of Indie Hackers for indie game devs, I would find out where indie game devs work. I would find out where they live. I'd find out where they hang out online. I'd find out what they like. I'd ask all the same questions, go through the entire process again, and my interviews would come out probably different. I would ask different questions. They would look different, and hopefully they would be successful as well. Finally, where should you dig in El Dorado? You need to dig deep. You know how to dig deep. And by the way, if you want more information on that, go to Amy Hoy's site, Stacking the Bricks. She's got a lot of information. She calls it Sales Safari. It's great on the questions you should ask and where to find people like this. Where should you dig? Well, I have my own personal thoughts on where I want to dig, right? I want to dig where the money's at. Justin Jackson gave a great talk the other day, and he was talking about how he was selling products to snowboarders who didn't have any money, right? Ideally, you should be in a business that has money. A friend of mine started a website, Key Values. It's basically in the hiring space for developers. Companies pay a lot of money to hire developers. It's absolutely nothing for a company to give her $3,000 to feature their profile on her website because they're going to hire engineers as a result of it, right? She's digging in a place where money actually exchanges hands, and it really helps. Right? And there's all sorts of other questions you can put on here. I made this list of questions in literally 5 minutes, just preparing for this talk. I think you should go make your own checklist, right? You don't need to look at my checklist. You can make your own checklist and think about what you want in a business. What do you want? Do you want to make money? Do you want to work in a field that you like? Right? Wherever you dig, it's going to determine what the next 5 years of your life are like. And if you get into this business, if you decide you want to start a company because you want creative freedom, and then you decide to dig in a spot in El Dorado where there is no creative freedom, then you're going to be unhappy with yourself in 5 years. Right? If you want more time to spend with your kids, but then you start a customer support intensive business, you're going to be unhappy, and it's going to be a tragedy. So I would say put a lot of thought, at least a few hours, into coming up with your own checklist for where you want to dig in El Dorado, and then dig deep, and don't spend all your time digging shallow holes or just guessing where the gold is. So let's talk about growth for a little bit. Third landscape is called the climbing wall of growth. Any talk about growth and startups and tech and businesses usually starts with a slide like this, right? This is how startups grow. It's an exponential growth curve. And when I talk to founders who are a little bit less experienced, it's interesting to see what their mental model is that explains this curve. Usually it's something like there's an explosive happening at the beginning, right? This curve is so smooth and it's so continuous that it must have been the result of some sort of rocket ship launch, right? It must have been the result of some sort of amazing viral growth hack. And after that, the company just rode the wave and it was smooth sailing all the way up to the top, right? And the problem with this point of view is that when you actually go looking, and you go looking at example stories, you find a lot of corroborating evidence, right? How did Hotmail grow? Well, they just put a link at the bottom of all their emails that said sent by Hotmail, and after that, they went straight to the top. Airbnb, they got professional photographers to take photos of their people's apartments and then smooth sailing from there, right? Yelp put badges on their websites and they went straight to the top of Google. Dropbox, right? Who could forget Dropbox and their infamous referral strategy? They get free space by referring a friend. After that, Dropbox fired all their marketers and everyone in growth, and they just grew to the top because it was smooth sailing, right? And it's not just like these high growth tech startups, it's indie hacker type businesses, right? You can read Nathan Barry's story of ConvertKit, right? What most people come away with from reading his story is that Nathan Barry just quit all of his other stuff and did direct sales and made 100x times the revenue, right? It's very easy to believe in these very simple stories, and the problem is when you do, you're buying into sort of a lie. Right? It's never this simple. Maybe 1 out of 1 million businesses has a simple growth hack that's that simple, and it probably won't be your company. I think a much better model for envisioning how growth happens is a climbing wall. Who here has ever been to a climbing wall or knows what a climbing wall is? Right? And climbing wall, the way it works is you start at the bottom, you climb your way to the top, 1 step at a time. Right? And I got a secret for you, there is no magical viral growth step at the bottom of the climbing wall that will launch you straight to the top. It doesn't exist. At least I've never been to a climbing wall that had that. Climbing the wall is hard. You have to go 1 step at a time. It's not easy. Like, these people are really good. Every single step takes effort. Every single step takes your attention. And if you stop climbing up the climbing wall, you'll stop progressing. It doesn't just happen automatically, and you shouldn't trust that it will. I think a lot of experienced founders are well aware that growth is kind of a slog, that they're going to run into roadblocks and have to figure out new solutions. And a lot of inexperienced founders aren't aware that this is what's going to happen. So this isn't the whole story. Whenever you see a growth curve that looks exponential and you say, wow, this must have been the result of one thing, remember that underneath this, there's a bunch of people, there's founders, there's employees who are working to solve problems. They're working hard to make that graph continue to go up and to the right. And if they were to stop at any point in time, the graph would level off. So let's go through an example. This guy here is Jason Grishkoff. He's one of the first people that I interviewed on Indie Hackers. He's the first person that I had on the podcast. I talked to him last year about his business, SubmitHub. Now, Jason's story is that in 2009, he started a blog called Indie Shuffle. I talked a lot about this in my roundtable groups. He ran this blog for 7 years. It's a music discovery blog. So he would find indie music. People who liked indie music would subscribe to his blog because he had good taste. And he grew it to like many hundreds of thousands of visitors every day. Eventually, Jason realized he was getting 300 email pitches a day from artists, from publicists, from musicians who said, please put my music on your blog, right? They wanted to get discovered. They realized his blog was popular. They were emailing him, and it was driving him insane, right? And so Jason had the bright idea that he was going to start a business, right? He started a SaaS business called SubmitHub, where for a small fee, you could submit a song to his blog, and you would guarantee to get a reason why he would or would not feature your song on his blog. It was like $1 to submit. Now, by the time I interviewed him, Jason was making $55,000 a month in revenue, only a couple years after he started his business. And we shared the story on Hacker News, and what do you think people on Hacker News said? Said, I can't learn anything from this story. Right? Jason already had a successful blog, and it was smooth sailing from there. The only work he had to do were all the calories he burned from laughing his way to the bank. He basically, it was easy for him, right? I can't do that. There's no story here. And I don't blame them for coming up with that conclusion, because Jason didn't quite share the full story. But I got him on my podcast, and he told me what really happened. He said, I hand-tailored more than 1,000 emails to blogs. It took me 5 months of doing it every single day. People were skeptical. They didn't respond, so he would tweet them. He would Facebook message them. He'd send them SoundCloud messages. He would send another email when they didn't respond. He'd find another person who worked at that blog. He kept trying for 5 months, sending emails every single day, right? And he's still doing it to get other blogs to sign up for his platform. It wasn't easy. It wasn't like he automatically, because he had an audience, shot straight to the climbing wall of growth. He had to take it 1 step at a time and resolve issue after issue. And this is what almost every single business looks like. And it's what your business will look like too if you want it to keep growing. And even after that, even after he got the business off the ground, he had other issues, right? It's different to get a label to sign up than to get a blog to sign up. It's different to get creators and channels from YouTube to sign up and support SubmitHub than it is to get bloggers, right? It's different to get publicists to submit songs than it is to get artists to submit songs. Every single one of these steps was a different step on the climbing wall that Jason had to figure out how to climb. And every single step he thought, dang, I don't know how to figure this out. And he had to learn something and then do something to overcome that barrier, right? That's why it's 1 step at a time. It took him 8 months from the time that he actually built SubmitHub to get his first dollar. People were so skeptical they wouldn't sign up for his platform. And then it took him 2 years. Today, Jason has done over 3.5 million song submissions. It costs between $1 and $3 to submit a song, depending on what blog you submit to, so you can do the math to figure out how much money he's made. He signed up 450 blogs, right? And it's been hard work for him the entire time, but it's a really cool business, and it's been incredibly profitable as well. So if you envision growth as a climbing wall, right, just as you envision ideas as sort of El Dorado, you realize a few things, right? First thing you should realize is the first step is the simplest. You don't have to be a fucking genius to put your foot on the first step of the climbing wall. Right? It's the same with growing your business. Right? You don't need an elaborate growth strategy to email 1,000 people. You don't need any sort of skill set. You don't need any knowledge. You just email 1,000 people. When I started Indie Hackers, I emailed 200 people to get them to be on the website. And almost everybody said no. They didn't want to share their revenue. They didn't want to take the time to do an interview. They didn't see what was in it for them. But I wasn't particularly clever. It was just brute force. And it's the same thing with the climbing wall. You just put your foot on the wall. And the thing is, if you go to any climbing gym, there's a lot of people who aren't on the wall. Most people aren't on the wall, right? And in startup land, most people aren't on the wall because they don't want to take the first step, right? They're spending all their time searching for this magical step. They don't want to do anything that's not going to scale, right? They see all these examples of all these businesses that seem to catapult straight to the top, and they think, it's not worth doing anything unless it can catapult me straight to the top of the wall. But that step doesn't exist, and you're much better just doing something simple, doing something that'll get you on the wall, because you realize that it's okay that you start small. This is advice you hear all the time. Like, what does it mean that it's okay to start small? Well, what it means is that when you take your first step on the wall and you look up, you suddenly see all these new steps that you couldn't reach when you're on the ground, right? Just by taking that first step, by me getting the first 10 interviews on Indie Hackers, I was able to launch something, and it got way more people interested in interviews, right? By Jason getting his first people onto his blog, right, our first people onto his SubmitHub website, it was way easier for him to convince other people to do it, right? As you climb up the wall, it makes the newer steps easier to do, which is why it's okay to start small, because you can continually build your way up the wall and take new steps. The other thing is you need to keep climbing, right? Nobody ever jumps straight to the top of the wall. And if you stop on the wall, if you don't even realize you're on the wall, or you don't keep climbing, your growth is going to stagnate. It's not going to keep going, right? There were, I think, like 400 or 500 other popular music blogs before Indie Shuffle, and every single one of those music blogs was sort of on the wall like this, looking straight ahead, like I'm a music blog and this is all I can ever be, and there are no steps above me. Right? Jason was being extremely creative. He was thinking, what else can I do? I'm getting all these submissions, right? He realized he's on a climbing wall, and it was hard for him to take that actual step and pull himself up. But the reason he was able to pivot from a music business and to the SubmitHub business is not because he got lucky. It's because when he was actually searching for new steps to take and other people weren't. So you have to always keep climbing. No matter where you are right now, you might think you're stuck, you might think your business is one thing, but a lot of businesses, a lot of startups, a lot of companies end up becoming something entirely different than they were at the beginning because they keep looking for new steps. And you're never gonna find those new steps unless you actually try and you keep your mind open. Finally, plan your route. When I launched Indie Hackers, I basically spent the next 6 weeks in a panic because every single day the traffic was lower than the day before, right? I had no follow-up plan to my launch, right? I didn't think about it in advance. I was just like, I'll launch, we'll see what happens. But I could have had a follow-up plan. I could have thought about it, right? There's other people who've launched too. There's other people who are also climbing the climbing wall, and you can see the routes that they take, you can see the steps that are available to them, and you can plan your own route and see what worked for them and what sorts of steps lead to other steps easily, right? One thing that I did do right was I started a mailing list. And I didn't start that on accident. I started because I started previous businesses without a mailing list and then kicked myself once I launched and got no emails, right? So I was already looking at sort of step 2, even though I was taking step 1, and that made it easier for me to take a more efficient path up the mountain. I think you should do the same thing, right? See what steps other people are taking, look multiple steps ahead, and see if you can sort of find an easier route to go up the wall with your company. And finally, stay on track to your destination. One of the things that people don't realize is that you end up with this sort of to-do list when you have a company, and your to-do list only ever gets bigger, right? Every single time you add a new feature, you serve a new customer segment, you get more people on your app, you're gonna start getting more ideas, more things to do, you're gonna get very distracted. It's very easy to get to the point you're very myopically just climbing to whatever step seems next to you, whatever seems easiest, and you look up and you find that you've just climbed sideways along the wall and you're nowhere near your destination. So I think having a vision is a good way to make sure that you know what to say no to. Always keep your eye on the top part of the wall that you want to get to, and don't go sideways if you can avoid it. Finally, we're going to talk about what I call the living room of vision. So we're at MicroConf. Probably if you guys hear the word mission statement or vision, you start thinking about sort of cheesy corporate stock photos. I know I do. But I think vision is interesting. A lot of companies above a certain size have a vision. Pretty much everyone does. And when I get these founders on my podcast, I like to ask them, why do you have a vision? Just because I want to hear in their own words why it's necessary. And they say a lot of things. They say, we have a vision because it helps us hire, right? No one's going to join our company unless we have a vision or a mission. Or they say, we have a vision because it keeps everybody on the team on the same page, right? If we don't have a vision, how's everybody going to know what to do, what direction to go in? And it's kind of unsatisfying because if you're a MicroConf attendee and you're a one-person startup or a two-person startup, some of these reasons don't apply to you. You might not be hiring, right? You might not have a giant team that you need to keep on the same page. And so you don't need a vision, right? There's no point in having a vision. There's no point in understanding what you're going for. I actually disagree with that. I think having a vision can actually be extremely helpful for you, and here's why. The number one reason that your fledgling business will die is because you quit, right? A lot of people are afraid that I'm going to get sued by patent troll and they're going to shut down my company. A competitor is going to take me to the Deadpool, or my servers are going to crash and I'll never be able to recover. That almost never kills your business. What kills your business is that you quit, right? You try a few things, they don't work out, you get discouraged, and then you stop, right? And the way to avoid this is to have confidence, right? And so let's talk about the living room of vision for a little bit. This is my living room. There's Channing working on my couch. Let's say I invite you to San Francisco. You come to my living room, and I tell you, hey, I had a really valuable diamond in here the other day. It's worth like $3 million, but I just misplaced it. And if you could find that, I'll just give you $1 million. Right? How long are you going to spend searching my living room for this diamond? A few hours, yeah. A few days, yeah. A few weeks, months, maybe years, right? You're going to rip up my floorboards. You're going to tear apart my sofa cushions. You'll flip over my TV, disassemble my stereo. You'll do whatever it takes to find this diamond because you have a lot of confidence that there's a diamond there. And it's just a matter of time before you get to it, right? It's just a matter of eliminating all the options and you'll get there, right? You have a ton of confidence. It's the same thing with your business, right? Founders who hear about these stories where they're doing all these things for month after month, year after year, they're trying everything and it's not working, yet they eventually make it succeed. Why are they doing that, right? Why do they feel so confident that it's going to work? It's because they have an idea that for whatever reason, they have a lot of confidence in their vision, right? It's not something they chose on a whim. It's not something they think can't work. It's something they're absolutely 100% sure will work. They just have to find the right path. And as a result, they try much harder, right? They try a bunch of marketing strategies when their first marketing strategies fail. Right? They try a bunch of different distribution channels when their first distribution channels fail. They try different features, right? Because they are very confident about the end goal, just like you'd be very confident about the presence of this diamond if I guaranteed it was there and would give you $1 million. Right? Vision gives you confidence. Confidence makes you try harder. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Well, let's try a different scenario. Let's say I invite you to my living room and I say, hey, look, there may or may not be a diamond here. I don't really know. I didn't see anyone drop a diamond here, but it's a possibility, right? How much time are you going to spend searching my living room? I don't know, a minute, right? You're going to give up really easily, right? And a lot of people are starting businesses like this where they didn't spend a lot of time thinking about the initial idea, right? They didn't dive into the market. They didn't ensure that people actually care about this, that this is a problem that needs to be solved, that people will pay money for. And so of course you're going to quit when the going gets tough, right? So I think even if you're a small indie hacker business, it helps to have a vision, right? For indie hackers, my vision is to inspire people to create internet businesses and to help these new founders succeed at a scale large enough to have a global impact. To me, this sounds like a lot of fun, and there's absolutely no reason that it's not possible. I can't think of any sort of law of physics that this violates. I've talked to enough people to know that it's possible. I can spend every day for the next 10 years working on this vision and never get bored, never get discouraged because I hit a rock, never think, oh, do I need to pivot and quit and go into something else because I have a vision? I think everyone here should have a vision as well. You'll enjoy building your companies a lot more. And finally, I'll say that all of these landscapes are just landscapes that I arbitrarily came up with, right? You can have your own metaphors. And as you read and learn about startups, I encourage you to create your own metaphors. It's very difficult to memorize thousands of facts from interviews and books and podcasts, but it's easier if you can sort of group these facts together in metaphors and analogies. I know Rob has his stair-step approach, which is great, and similar to the climbing wall of growth. Amy Hoy's got her sales safari. Come up with your own metaphors. Figure out your own way to think about growing your startup, and I think you'll learn a little bit faster and you'll be a little bit more effective. Thanks.
All right, great talk, Cortland. We have time for some questions. We got time. So if anyone have a question for Cortland? All right.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Apart from content and using Google as a search engine, is there other ways for a newly launched business to gain traction?
Yeah. So the question is, apart from just content marketing and using Google, how else can a newly launched business gain traction? I think it depends a lot on your target customers. What I see a lot is everybody knows sort of the default places to launch. They know about Hacker News, they know about Product Hunt, and that's it. And they see other people doing it, so they do that. But I think it really depends on who you're talking to. So the example I gave in the talk was if I wanted to, for example, get indie hackers in front of indie game developers and start doing interviews with indie game developers. What I would do is spend a lot of time with indie game developers because they're my target market. I would learn that indie game developers go to these conferences in Japan and the United States and other countries. I would learn what sort of influencers they care about. I talked to Rand Fishkin on my podcast recently, and he said growth is easy for him and the code is the hard part. He's sort of the opposite of most startups. And I asked what makes growth easy, and he's like, 2 things. Number 1, I know how to make things that aren't boring to my target audience. And number 2, I know how to find the influencers, right? He knows how to find the people that his target audience care about, where they get their news from, where they hang out online. And yeah, Google's a great channel. Almost everybody searches, but almost every customer segment has some place online where they get their news, where they discover new product recommendations. And I think if you can get in front of them and you understand them, you're much more likely to succeed. So I can't give you one blanket answer, I think it depends entirely on what your product is and who you're trying to serve.
Hey, thanks. That was a great talk. And you said you're talking about keeping your eye at the top of the climbing wall and stuff like that. And like my mom was always like, you know, I'm bored, and she's like, that's because you're boring, not because there's nothing to do. And sometimes like I feel like, well, maybe the question is, how do you know what that top thing is?
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to get distracted by, like you said, all the things that are level to you. And especially when you're starting, you have no idea what this thing could be yet, you know, and you got your first few customers. So how do you keep your eye on a goal that it isn't defined yet?
Yeah, so I had this issue at Indie Hackers. It's like trying to grow the site. What are we going to do to grow the site? It's only me and Channing working on this, right? There's only 2 of us. How much content can we produce? And we're very myopically focused on what can we do that will grow? And so we're like, okay, we'll do these self-serve articles, or anyone can write an article and it'll be like Medium. And then I talked to Patrick Collison, and he was like, where are you guys going to be in 2 years? And I'm like, I have no idea, right? It depends if these articles work out, then we'll be like Medium. And if they don't, we'll be doing some other idea. And he's like, no, you need to have a vision, right? And at the end of the day, like, I think you can decide your vision. You might not know what's going to work for your company. Like, we thought long and hard about what Indie Hackers is, what makes it special, and what we want it to be. We thought about what we could be confident in growing and what we would be happy growing. And we came up with a vision from, you know, a few slides ago. And this is a vision that can encapsulate almost any possibility, right? Indie Hackers might be a forum under this. It might be a podcast. It might be a ton of podcasts. It might be a bunch of meetups, right? The path doesn't matter, right? The diamond might be under my couch or under my TV, or it doesn't really matter. If you have a vision that you're confident in, then you can sort of break away from being obsessed over like your particular growth strategies, and you can be more like focused on solving the problem that needs to be solved and serving the target customers that you want to serve, and whatever that looks like is what it looks like. So I think, like, in a way, if you do enough research and you have enough interest in what you're trying to actually do, you can come up with a vision that's completely independent from sort of the very specific tactics they're using to get there.
All right, any other questions? This is your chance. All right, thanks so much, Cortland.